So, I moved to Texas a few years back, found a nice girl to share my life with, and things have been great. Well, just a few months ago, we both went out to this lookout point outside of town to make love in the back of my car. We get to the lookout, we're the only ones there. It was great. We got to the deed, and in the course of it, I'm on top of her, and we're going to town. Her and I's heads are both closest to the rear of the vehicle. She's lying on her back, and as she looks up, she can see directly out the back window. We're in the middle of doing a business deal here, and I'm not even focused on anything else. She pauses for a second, and her face starts to change from a confused look to a horrified one, followed by screaming. I quickly look up, thinking somebody's outside of her window, and it was a fucking scary wolf face looking in our vehicle. It was breathing hot breath on the window, and you could clearly see the condensation on the glass. This thing had striking yellow, reddish eyes that had tiny pupils dialed in on me. It wasn't even 3 feet away from my head. It had a massive face and almost an expression like it was grinning at us. I was paralyzed with fear, and after about 2 seconds, this thing stands up, since it was crouching to look in our window, and walks off. Naked, panicking, and scrambling to get our clothes back on, my girlfriend demands to take her back home now. We got the hell out of Dodge before that thing could come back.
I get home from work. It's almost midnight. The door opens and the home security system does that high-pitched beep 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 chime. I'm in my kitchen eating a late dinner before going to bed. I hear a door open and then the home security thing go beep beep beep, but it definitely sounded like it came from outside. I'm sitting right by the back door, so I go check the front door. The front door has a screen door and a wooden door that leads to a small entry room, then a second door inside that leads up the stairs and into the house. These are loud, old doors. I didn't hear the screen door open, and I didn't hear the main door close, but I also didn't hear the second door open. The door is just double locked and no other doors are opened. Nobody is standing outside. Okay, maybe it was the neighbor's door, and maybe they have the same system. I hear it again, and it sounds like it's coming from outside of the front of the house. I look out the window. It looks like there's a deer outside. It's crawling on the yard, with its belly on the ground. It decides to stand up and continues to stand up, but on its back legs. The deer makes the beeping sound with its head raised up into the air. It's not a deer. It looks like a guy, but with deer legs. It's too dark to see what's really going on.
I'm home.
What the F?
I'm home.
The creature sounds like a dog is barking, but is trying to vomit at the same time. It starts to gallop away and across the street. Beep, beep, beep. What's weird about this is that I do not live in a rural area. The deer population typically stays down towards the outskirts of the city. I have never seen or heard anything like this.
Hello. I've watched your Project Feather video, the story that was supposedly sent to you. I too have worked in special projects similar across the country, but not like that. I'm going to ensure my identity stays secret to you. I can't confirm nor deny that the details in that video are true, even to an extent. One of your commentators actually found holes in the story, the timeline. He or she is a smart individual. The details given in that video have an incorrect timeline, based on the information given. Again, I can't confirm or deny the project itself and what that enlisted and entailed was true or false. What I can tell you is that similar projects are going on this very second. Maybe not with canine DNA, but there's a host of others. We'll call them bioweapons for the time being. Some with a multitude of various DNAs, including primarily human. Others will focus on just a singular animal's DNA to construct form from. I would prefer not to go into greater detail at risk of this information reaching the public, but do know there's more that goes on than you as a civilian will ever know. I have colleagues with much higher clearances than I do, and the things that are going on might seem like a science fiction movie. It's happening and there's no way to stop any of it. While it's important to be open-minded about information, it's more important to be extremely aware of your surroundings and always carry a weapon. Other human beings, cougars, bear, you name it. There are things much worse than them you need to concern yourself with that are out there and have far easier access to you than you do to them. Oh, and one more thing. That video really hit the nail on the head with the various military and governmental branches having knowledge of what's going on. Most of them don't know the full extent of what goes on, but have a much better idea than the general public, especially the local police departments. Have a good day. I'll start with a little backstory before I open up into the whole story. I'm 25, have a grandmother who's in her 80s and is really losing it to the point to where I'm officially her full-time caretaker. Grandpa died about 12 years ago, and between her dementia, diabetes, and other chronic pain, my grandmother has just deteriorated more and more, so I've had to step in. I'm very close to my grandmother, so this isn't an easy role for me to fill, but alas, I needed to do it. As I said, my grandmother can be very old and senile, but she doesn't lie about things, never really has. Now let me explain to you her house. Her husband, my grandfather, built it himself 50 plus years ago. It's a tiny little house, but fits for what they need. This was back when building codes weren't refined, so there were a lot of things on that house that needed to be redone or reworking, and never did. That's beside the point though. Around her house is a lot of yard. She pays someone to come and mow it now and then, but out back she has a massive area full of lots of plants and bushes. If I had to guess, 12 to 15 feet are just of rose bushes, which are her prized bushes. It's beautiful, especially when they're in full bloom in the spring. It really attracts a lot of deer. Now that you know the necessary details, this happened all throughout last spring. On nicer days, my grandmother enjoyed sitting out on the porch in the afternoon, knitting or reading. One afternoon, she starts storming in the house, complaining how dare somebody would come onto her property and that she needs to grab the gun. I calmed her down and had her explain what was happening. She was so flustered, but I figured she might be out of her mind, which is why I stopped her. She explained someone in a big, tall, hairy dog suit was walking around by the rose bushes, and it made her furious someone would mess around like that. I was startled but very confused by what she was telling me. I went out there and didn't see a damn thing. I was just thinking, okay, Grandma's really losing it now. I even walked out by the rose bushes and didn't see a sign of anyone being around the bushes. Some deer droppings here and there, but nothing else. The deer droppings were common. It wasn't until a few days later I was watering some of the plants on the side of the house that I heard noises over in the bushes. My grandmother was inside eating lunch, I think. She was doing something. I, thinking it was just a deer, didn't really pay any attention to the noise. I start to hear a panting noise, which I thought was odd, so I look over in the direction of the rose bushes, and peering out from the top of these bushes is this black German Shepherd dog head. I kinda stumble backward a little and gasp, and the head is just there, staring at me. It was massive. Then I see it duck down and fly out behind the bushes on all fours into the woods. It was a huge animal. It was like a huge abstract-shaped German Shepherd, the size of a moose. I only saw the body for a few seconds, but it was clear and sunny out, so I had a perfect view. Its back legs looked shorter than the front, and had bigger, more muscly arms. Its back arched up, kind of like a hyena's does, but with a head that looked to be too big for its body. I kid you not. I ran back into the house and told my grandmother that it wasn't a person. It was actually an animal that was in the yard. I wasn't scared, but intrigued at this thing. It had dark eyes, but very dark fur. It was slightly panting, but I could not see any teeth at all. I will say though that it had to have been tall because those rose bushes are huge and are easily 8+ feet tall. The thing's head was popping out of the top fully. I still don't know if it was standing on 2 legs or what to watch me. My grandmother and I would continue to see this thing on and off. Never fully though. Once later June came, we stopped seeing it, so I don't know if it left the area or what. The deer continue to come through this area most of all summer, even into the fall, just in case you're wondering if it was following the deer. I never found any carcasses or other signs of this animal was hunting the deer, but I also never went out and looked. The thing is, my grandmother wasn't even that freaked out, just annoyed more than anything. When I told her, she actually believed me and just demanded that I make it stay away from her rose bushes.
I'm 16, and I live in the backwoods of South Carolina. I've heard stories from the local kids of creepy things that happen in the forest, about 2 miles away from my new home. I decided to go check it out because how scary can it really be? I grab a pistol and a knife, as well as a flashlight, and I head out into the dense forest. As I'm in the forest, it starts to get dark. I turn on my flashlight. A heavy fog all of a sudden rolls in, bringing in a smell of copper and burnt hair. The hairs on the back of my neck start to stand on end. I start to hear this weird sound. It sounds like whispering and giggling. I hear something running around in the woods nearby. I hear it get louder and closer. I turn around and see something crawling extremely fast and low to the ground, on all 4 legs. Whatever it was seemed to have arms and legs, like a human. I fire a shot right into its back, and I can see the blood splatter and a gunshot wound. It lets out a blood-curdling screech and retreats back into the woods. The fog lifts and the smell, suddenly, goes away. I nope my way out of there, all the way home. I get home and there it is, right in my driveway. It runs towards me and I shoot at it, but the bullets don't seem to fire. My gun was on safety. It jumps up and all I can see are its huge white eyes, and I black out. I wake up some time later on top of my dad's car, with my dad standing over me, trying to wake me up. My head hurts like nothing else and my ears are ringing. I tell my dad what had happened in the woods, and he just laughs and tells me it was probably nothing. Life as I know it goes back to normal for about 3 hours, when my dad says, "Hey Jake, mind getting me some of those steaks out of the fridge?" I look at him and say, "Dad, my name's Nick, not Jake." He just looks at me like he's full of hatred. I just give him the steaks and he just goes into his room with them, uncooked. He comes out of his room about an hour later with only the packaging and throws them away. I don't even think about asking what had happened. At 11 p.m., he tells me to go to bed, which is odd, because it's Friday and he doesn't usually care when I stay up, but I do as I'm told and I go to my room. Around 3:15 in the morning, my door opens. It's my dad. I say nothing and pretend to be asleep. The smell of copper returns to the air and I feel sick to my stomach. My dad just sits on the edge of my bed and just looks at me for what I would say to be about 30 minutes. He then mumbles something under his breath, with a voice I don't recognize. My blood turns cold, and I just lay there. He finally gets up and leaves, and I finally am relieved, but I cannot sleep the whole night and just lay there in my bed. Finally, the next morning, I get up and I go out into the living room. My dad is asleep on his lazy boy recliner, and his nose is bleeding. I wake him up and I tell him I'm spooked and I ask him about the blood. He has no idea where it came from. I ask him about the night before, and he has no idea what I am talking about. And he doesn't remember waking me up from being on top of his car. My heart drops when he states that it was still Friday, when I know for a fact that it was definitely Saturday. He argues with me until I show him my phone with the day and time. At this point, we are both freaked out. I've never ventured out into the woods since then, and nothing strange has happened, except sometimes I will hear the front door open and shut a few times during the night.
Where I live, I have to drive an old highway to and from work. I'm on this road for roughly 40 minutes to where I have to work at. This highway takes me through much more desolate farming areas, but also short bursts of small neighborhoods with houses and turnoffs here and there. There's always one section of road that kind of freaks me out. It's in a much more rural farming area, so it's primarily all cattle and agriculture. No houses in sight. Since I have to be at my place of employment early in the morning, I'm usually driving in the dark. I've seen large shadows dart across the road in this stretch of road. I've gotten ominous feelings like something bad was going to happen. The other weird thing is, I've been seeing a lot of dead deer on the side of the road, and the pull-offs. I don't normally see much deer around here, so it's weird. These aren't just dead deer on the side of the road, like they've jumped out and gotten hit. Especially the volume of dead deer that have been popping up is also strange. In fact, most of the time it's pieces of deer. Yes, like half a deer body, but no head. In fact, one time there was a deer head on the side of the road by there. Last I saw was the upper half of a deer in the pull-off. Looked like it had been ripped in half. It wasn't eaten on or anything. I don't know what kind of vehicle does that to a deer, unless it got ran over. I didn't even see any blood. Cleanup crew takes their time doing this road since these carcasses will stay present for at least a few days. On my way home from work, it's bright out, so I can clearly see what's become of these deer. The highway is driven on, but it's not exactly a high-traffic road by any means. Just a simple 2-lane highway. Nothing special. I rarely if ever see somebody else behind me or coming in the oncoming lane on my way to work, so I keep my brights on most of the time. It's been this way since I've had my job for the past 4 years, but only in the past couple of months has this part of the road gotten so weird. Besides the deer, I've only seen those large shadows running across the road and around the pull-off. It scares me and I don't like thinking about it, especially the speed of whatever it is I've been seeing. It's large and very fast. I assume it has to do with the dead deer, but I don't know. It happens so fast that I can't make out a distinctive shape. Just being able to tell it's a large black mass. I hate driving this section of road every morning. It sucks. I'm always worried that something is going to happen. I've only seen some of these figures 4 or 5 times now, and the dead deer have been constant. To be honest, I really don't want to see why there's so many dead deer, and or what these large dark shapes are that are running around. It freaks me out to even talk about it. Knowing that I gotta go out again on Monday morning makes me dread my commute. All of this has been happening since the beginning of January. I have no idea if that time of year has anything to do with what's been happening. My dad's got kind of a wild story that I'll share with you. I mean, it's not much of a story as it is a single event. Back when he was younger, in his 20s, he went down to Australia for a month for work, or something work-related, I remember. Ended up going hiking out in the Australian outback for miles on end and got lost for over 7 days. And at the time, he told me he saw all sorts of beauty of nature. He even ran into some indigenous people, and then claims he was attacked by an upright walking wolf that telepathically told him it was going to rip his heart out. Crazy, I know, right? It scares me because my father is a die-hard science, no lies kind of guy. He has to have evidence in front of him if you try to convince him of something. He's always been that way. For him to tell me about it as openly as he did disturbed me. He has some pictures of the trip that he took, not that part obviously, and has truth to anything he's ever told me about. He told me he fought this thing off with his bare hands and it left horrible claw scars on his thighs, chest, and arms, which he does have those scars. He also said this upright wolf was as tall as him and had a more slender build, but tapered at the waist like a dog. I don't know if this detail matters at all, but I've always been a huge fan of Diablo 2. For those that don't know anything about it, it's a video game. In it, you can play a druid class that shapeshifts into a werewolf. I was playing a character of mine who happens to be a druid, and was in said werewolf form when my dad happened to see me playing it, stopped for a second and said, "Hey Jory, remember that time I was in the Outback? That guy you're playing kinda looks like what I fought off out there." Again, maybe it's an irrelevant detail, but it just stuck with me, and I thought your viewers might like to hear it. It's just kind of interesting to make that correlation.
I was 16 when this story happened. I have family down in Alabama. They farm and own a huge amount of land down in Huntsville. My uncle owned a big house and a bunch of trailers that they put out in the woods for hunting and camping. Down south, my cousins suggest that we go out there to camp. They know I'm a city kid and they like to tease me about being from Chicago. We collect some food, kill a pig and some chickens, and bring the necessities to camp out in the woods for a few days. We get to the camp, and it's obvious that something is very wrong. The air has this weird electric smell, like right before a storm, like the ozone. We think nothing of it, and unpack and go down to the little creek to swim for a few hours. All of a sudden, some older white guy and a white teenager come out of the bushes. He has a shotgun in the crook of his arm, and says hello, and asks us what we're doing this far back into the land. We tell him about my uncle, who he knows, and say that we are out camping. He tells us to be real careful out here, and stick together when there's a big animal out in the woods. His son, who is my age, asks if he can stay to hang out with us. He says okay. We end up just goofing around the whole day, and we go back to camp, and we pull out some stuff for the campfire, even though the trailers both had kitchenettes. The crazy guy in the woods' son, Tanner, says that he wants to run home. His family's property sits up next to my uncle's, and asks if he can come out camping with us later. My cousin Rooster says that he's going to go with him since it's pretty dark, and one of the girls that is with us says that she's going to walk with him. It's about 7 o'clock right now, and it's starting to get pretty dark. They take flashlights with them, and they take the trail towards Tanner's property. The rest of us just chill and make s'mores. About 30 or 40 minutes later, there's a smell of ozone again. You can smell it over the smell of the fire. It smells like this really nasty copper smell, like right after you had a nosebleed and it stopped. It wasn't exactly like dried blood. It was that nasty metallic back of your throat smell. We immediately think that it's some kind of electrical malfunction, or someone left a hot plate on or something. We search the trailers and nothing is on. All we can do is just smell that terrible smell. All of a sudden, we can hear these people boogieing down the path towards us. Tanner, my cousin, and one of the girls all come running into the clearing, out of breath, and they didn't even break stride. They all ran into the trailer right by where the fire was. We all immediately nope out of there and get into the trailers. They end up calming down, and even my cousin is crying his eyes out at this point. All the while, the fire is getting lower and lower, so my other cousins say, "F this," and go outside to go fix one of the generators out in the shed. My cousin says, "No one's going outside," and locks the front door. Ain't nobody else is going out. He's been crying too hard and his eyes are bloodshot and puffy. His pants are so dirty. He tells us that they went up to Tanner's house and talked to his father to make sure that they could go camping with us. The father said to make sure to pack a rifle, just in case. Because a few days before, one of their pigs that they farmed was ripped up and eaten. They just assumed that it was one of the big cats or maybe a coyote. So they start walking back towards where we were camping. My cousin finally stops crying and shaking, and one of the girls that were with them says that they were starting to walk back when they got a really weird feeling. They then started to hear something in the forest. It was almost pitch black at this time, so they weren't sure at first what was going on. The girl says that she heard something in the bushes off to the trail on the right, and they all beamed their flashlights over there, and there was someone standing back in the woods in a little hollow. My cousin said that they shouted at him and told him that he was scaring people out in the woods and that he should not be out there. My cousin continues and says that they realized that the guy was facing away from them, so they keep walking and they start smelling that nasty coppery ozone smell. And they say that they've looked off into the forest on the opposite side, and it's just a dude standing in the forest, backwards slightly closer to the path. So they start walking back to our campsite, and Tanner realizes that he accidentally left the rifle. As they're telling the story, the smell is super strong, even inside the cabin. They say that after they started walking faster, that a kind of low gibbering had started coming out from both sides of the woods, and they started booking it back to the trailer. The girl said that she flashed her flashlight out into the woods to the side of them, and that something jerking itself through the woods, and the gibbering got louder and louder, and when they could finally see the light of our camp, something behind them started sprinting at them as hard as they could. The natural reaction was to run away as fast as they could and into the campsite. That brings us to now. So we're out in the woods, and we are assuming at this point that it's just some rednecks or something trying to mess with us. All of a sudden, my other cousin, Junior, starts going on about how he went to school with the native kid, that he was telling him about this goat man or something. We all collectively promptly tell him to shut up because we don't need anything spooky right now. But he just keeps going on and on about how it's this goat man, and how we're in the woods and blah blah blah. Now at the time, I've never heard of the goat man, or anything like that, but a couple of years ago, before I graduated from college, I've had a friend, or a roommate I should say, that was pretty well versed in the subject. To sum it up, it's basically this guy with the head of a goat, and he can shapeshift and get among groups of people to terrorize them. It's also supposed to be this kind of Wendigo thing, kind of like a skinwalker. It's bad mojo to even talk about it, and even worse if you see it. Keep in mind, I didn't know this back when I was 16, so my cousin is going on about this goat man and how it's going to try to get us. The girls are all terrified, and my cousins and I are trying to figure out if it's just some hillbillies or if it's actually this weird shape-shifting animal. All of a sudden, the smell just goes away. Like, to this day, I haven't even experienced anything like it. Like, usually smells fade away or get less strong, but this just literally just goes away. After an hour or so, we stop crapping ourselves enough to go back outside and to stoke the fire up again. We figure it was just some a-holes trying to F with us out in the woods, and we decide not to go home. Because of this, we decide that it might be a good idea to make the fire nice and bright, to scare away any animals that it could have been. Nothing else weird happens that night, and we stay another night, and for the main part of the night, nothing happens. About 1 a.m, we're outside getting drunk and telling ghost stories. As someone is finishing a spooky story, I don't remember what about, that smell comes back. And it is so strong, like one of the strongest smells I've ever experienced. It's so strong, in fact, that one of the girls literally starts vomiting. I stand up and you can actually feel how clammy the air is. I say that we should get inside. This isn't right. We should have just left when we could. We all go back inside and we're standing around, and my cousin just keeps going on about how it's this goat man again. My cousin tries to shut him up. All this time I am feeling this weird feeling in my gut, and I can't figure out what it is. We end up sitting in there for a while. The smell is just as strong and we're terrified. We're all huddled in this camper. We end up cooking brats for everyone because nobody wants to go outside. The brats are packed in a 4-pack, and we have a total of 3 packs altogether. I grill them up on the stove and everybody gets a hot dog. I get mine, and after a while, one of my cousins gets up and goes over to the pot to get another. He starts grumbling about how do I get 2 and everyone else only gets 1 hot dog. I look at him like he's an idiot. I tell him that everyone got 1 because there's only 12 brats and everyone got 1, thus 12 people. If he wanted more, he should have brought them. That's when one of the people with our group starts screaming, "Oh my gosh, get out of the cabin now." Everyone starts crying and shivering, and it finally dawns on one of the cousins what is actually happening. Me and my cousin both glance around the room, and I feel my heart sink. We all run out of the cabin, and I begin counting. There's actually 11 of us all together. How was there 12 of us when we were inside? On this trip, we brought a lot of people with us. Some people we didn't know very well, thus it was kind of difficult to kind of keep track of who was who. We all finally calmed down, and we decide it's best that we all spend the night back inside the little camper that we have. Everyone spends the rest of the evening on their toes. I don't think many of us got any sleep that night. Did we actually stay in a room with a skinwalker and not know about it? That's really something I wish not to think about.
In 2005, I had just gotten a job working as a manager's assistant at a local office firm. My work was pretty close to my apartment at the time, so I would ride my bike to and from work every day. It was maybe a 20-minute bike ride at most. I loved it, but as it became colder, I would just drive. During the spring and summer, I would walk or ride my bike. I got hired on right after July 4th. I remember that. That very same month, into August, I couldn't help but feel very uncomfortable on my way to work, like I was being stalked. I'd had that feeling that I was a poor rat in a maze awaiting my doom at the end. By my apartments was this huge plot of land that the city, I guess, had never really developed. It was rather large, and I had to walk all the way around it to get to the road I needed to go on. Sometimes bums would go in and camp out in there, but I know over time the city had recently gone up in there and cleared out a bunch of them. It didn't matter if I was coming home or going to work. Every time I walked by this lot of land, I just didn't feel right. Then I began to think the worst. Some bum who's waiting to jump and kill me is just waiting for the right moment to do it. Nothing ever happened, but I began to bring a large kitchen knife with me, just in case. Not holding on to it, of course, but I had it stashed away in my belt, under my coat. Silly, I know, but I wasn't going to risk anything. Then, one morning as I'm walking, I hear some branches breaking not too far away from where I was on the sidewalk. I look over and can't really see anything. The brush and trees were thick since it was July, and it blocked a lot of the light coming through the treetops. But I could see, up high, perched higher up than my own eyes, were two glowing amber orbs looking right at me. I didn't have to stand around to think if those were eyes or not. I took off in a full sprint. Of course, this happened on a day I decided to walk to work. Of course. I got a coworker to drop me off back at home that night. I coaxed this person to come pick me up and take me home for the following 3 days. Even with perks like gas paid for, etc., they denied me, so I was on my own for getting to and from work. This was no big deal, except I had some unknown thing wanting to kill me. The days afterward, I would go as fast as I could all the way around this plot of land. The feeling still persisted. I felt watched, preyed upon. I didn't dare think about those two eyes watching me like I saw. I wouldn't be able to keep calm. I had to keep it together and remain calm just till I got away and past this area. This went on till the beginning of September, actually. I never saw anything other than that one day in July, but the feelings dissipated afterward. I even noticed the woods were full of sounds like birds and animals when before things were dead silent. It gives me the creeps to even recount this event. I still have nightmares to this day about those damn eyes staring at me. I don't want to know what they belong to. Seeing and listening to all these encounters about what people claim is the Dogman brings up horrific childhood memories of a time I went camping in my own backyard. Now, I'm not claiming to have seen one of these things necessarily by myself because I can't explain it. But I am claiming that what I saw is what I saw. I was not dreaming. I was not high or drunk. I was 100% in the moment and visualized everything fully. I want to say I was about 9 at the time, and I loved the outdoors, still do. My dad operated a very lucrative and successful auto body business, so we had a nice house, lots of yard with lots of trees. As a kid, it was a dream come true. I was always outside playing sticks, building forts. Anything I could think of to do was fun. I was really into survival and would want to spend my days out there learning my environment. In fact, I got pretty good at it, even as a youngster. It wasn't long until I convinced my parents to start letting me camp out in the yard and sleep out there. They thought I was crazy because I had a nice warm bed to come to, but that didn't interest me. I wanted to be out where I felt most comfortable, even though technically I was also most vulnerable. Well, at the time. This was in the summer, so I turned in late in my tent. I remember falling asleep like normal and waking up to the most terrifying feeling. It was just a strong sense of something being wrong. Enough of this feeling that it woke me up out of a dead sleep. Being 9 years old, I couldn't understand how to process these emotions or understood what this meant until I started to hear noises from my left, coming closer in my direction. I don't know what in my body shot me up out of my tent, but it's like my brain froze and my body made up its own mind to go. As I'm climbing up out of my tent, mind you, I'm still not even mentally processing what's fully going on. I look over to where the noise is coming from, and out of the trees and bushes comes this werewolf heading right in my direction. I scream and run for the house as fast as I could. I never once looked back. I ran in the house going crazy, woke my mom and dad up. They both started freaking out, thinking something happened. I explained to them what I saw, parents consoled me, and my dad went out to investigate. He didn't see anything or any signs of anything, but I was sobbing and scared beyond my mind. They kept telling me I was dreaming, but I told them the feeling that I had, and I heard this monster coming before it revealed itself out of the bushes. They couldn't refute that. They only kept telling me it was a dream. I know it wasn't. I locked eyes with this thing for more than a couple of seconds. It was not a person in a suit. It was not my imagination. This looked like a monster straight out of Hollywood. The moon was bright that night too, so I saw way more details of it than I ever want to remember. I can't explain to you why I woke up. I can't explain to you why I had those horrible feelings like something was wrong, but I did. And I believe it was because this thing was coming to hurt me. It was maybe 10 seconds from me, hearing the noise to leaving my tent, and seeing it come out of the brush. It continued walking directly to me. Not as fast-paced though, just average. This thing was huge and had huge strides, so I was not going to wait for it to get me. I can't judge how many yards away it was, but enough that it gave me time to reach my house. If I had to guess, maybe 50? Had I stood there though, it would have been right up on me, and God only knows what it would have done to me. I don't remember its eyes at all. I don't remember a smell or anything else. I sure remember the feeling and seeing this thing, but that's about it. The more I think about this, the more I begin to question. Had it known I was out there and was waiting for the right time to get me? What did it randomly choose to come after me, if that's what it was doing? These are questions I wish I had the answers for, but unfortunately, I don't. It's taken me years to rationalize it as something that I can't explain and that I'm not crazy. This did happen to me, and I've just had to take time to accept it. I only recently discovered online communities with very similar experiences of other individuals that all come together to relay their encounters and not feel like a nut job for it.
This story happened a couple of years ago. It was me and my group of friends that we would go camping with quite often. It was our junior year and we had 2 weeks left before school started. We wanted to have fun and we decided to go camping, deep out into the woods. During this time, me and my friends were kind of into survivalism. We wanted to go camping with the bare essentials. We only brought some food and some tools that we could build a shelter with, and a couple of sleeping bags. I also brought a tarp just in case if things didn't work out. We literally picked a random patch of woods to go camping in. We went early in the day and tried to set up camp. We found a couple of sticks and logs and tried to put them together to make a shelter. I'm actually quite impressed looking back on how well we did. It did take us about 4 or 5 hours to make a decent shelter for all 4 of us. I wouldn't recommend it. After spending most of the day building our shelter, we were pretty hungry. As we were eating, it was around 6 or 7 in the evening. We decided to tell some scary ghost stories to make things more fun. We told your basic ghost stories, nothing too crazy. There was one that was kinda good, but wasn't that scary. As the night got later and the fire got more dim, that's when the more interesting stories came out, and we started talking about skinwalkers. I had heard about them before, but I haven't heard about some of the additional information that I heard that night. Apparently, skinwalkers used to be people, and they kind of sold their soul to the devil or something. By doing so, this granted them powers, the ability to change from one shape to another, mostly animals. I kinda had an idea about that, but this I didn't know. When you spoke, or even thought of the word skinwalker, it would draw their attention to you. Of course, me and my friends were skeptical about this idea. That's kinda silly, don't you think? Deep down though, something about that kinda terrified me. From that point on, I was kind of on edge that evening. As the fire was practically out, we'd realized that all the noise outside had suddenly stopped. All the wildlife, all the animals, stopped making their usual noises. Even the bugs that constantly bugged us during the evening had stopped making noise. Everyone, as if at once, ears kind of perked up into the air, searching for that sound, hoping for something normal to be happening. But deep down, we knew that it wasn't. Something was happening. It was bringing out this primitive nature of us that kind of put us on edge, as if there was a predator nearby. None of us said anything. We just listened to the crackling of the fire as it slowly faded into the night. As the fire got dimmer and dimmer, we could hear something getting slowly and slowly louder, as if it was approaching us from a far distance. This sound was accompanied by this horrible smell. It was as if there was rancid meat being hung from this dirty trash can that was blowing right into all of our faces. Being the tough guys that we were, and the idiots, we realized that none of us had packed a flashlight, kinda going with the theme of survivalism and having the bare essentials. There was definitely something in the woods making its way through the brush. Whatever the creature was, it didn't sound small. It could have maybe been a moose or something, but during this time of year was quite unlikely. All of us were quietly scanning the tree line, trying to see if we could see what it was that was stalking around our campsite. That's when I had this odd idea. I told all of my friends about what we heard earlier about the skinwalkers. I told them all to stop thinking about them, and that hopefully they would go away. Normally, my friends would have made fun of me for suggesting such a silly idea, but I think they were so scared that they had no choice but to agree with me. I then brought up a random conversation, anything to take our minds off of what was happening, and it seemed to be working. The sounds from around our campsite seemed to be going away, as did the smell. About 30 minutes later, it was as if all things were back to normal. The sounds of the forest came back to our ears, and we were pretty excited. I then made the suggestion that we should pack up and go back home, considering what was going on. It was about 1 in the morning, but it seemed like a better idea than staying out here for the rest of the night, especially with those creatures. I proposed the idea, and unanimously, my friends all agreed that we should have left a long time ago. One of the perks of not having much material when you go camping is that you don't have to pack up as much. We were packed up in about 15 minutes, all 4 of us, including putting out the fire. We were out of our campsite in record time, back onto our trail, hiking back to our cars. Unfortunately, this hike was about 20 minutes, and none of us had a flashlight. As we were hiking, I couldn't help but think what had happened earlier. That's when the smell came back. But not just the smell, the sounds of multiple creatures coming through the woods slowly approached our rear. There wasn't just one creature. There was at least 3 of them. My friends seemed to be catching on, and we tried to return back to our tactic of not thinking about it. But we were out in the woods with no light, being stalked by 3 skinwalkers. The task of not thinking about it was nearly impossible. We were about 10 minutes in when we started hearing what sounded like our friends being mimicked by a weird radio. The sounds sounded staticky, and it wasn't quite perfect impressions of our friends. The skinwalkers were mimicking what we had been saying all night, saying phrases that we had said that evening, as if they'd been listening, trying to perfect what we say and how we say it. My friends wanted to stop and try to turn around and confront these creatures. I told them that was not possible. We had to keep moving forward, or else. At this point, we start sprinting down this trail. We have no idea where we're going. It's pitch black, and the things behind us are now screeching and screaming, these terrible sounds. We finally go to where we think our cars are. By some miracle, we are able to find our way back to our cars. At this point, all of our gear has been dropped and we have nothing but our shoes and clothes on our backs. We all jump in my truck, and thankfully it was a 4-door. We're all inside, and I turn on the car and my headlights are on, facing the woods that we just had exited. The sight that laid before us was terrifying. About 20 yards away from us, in the woods, stood 3 creatures. They were all about 8 feet tall. The creatures looked like a crossbreed between a moose and a wolf. All of them had very large antlers. Some of them were broken off. Some of them were stained red. But all of them had very, very large teeth. Their eyes were a piercing red, and it was as if they were glowing. But all of these features do not come remotely close as to what was most terrifying about these creatures. They were all standing on their hind legs.
I'm close friends with an individual whose name I will not mention, but has worked years in the fish and game, wildlife, and other branches of park ranging. I've gotten him to tell me a lot of details of questions that I had, on the guise that I wouldn't release his name or identity. Fair enough, I thought. I'm a huge researcher into Bigfoot, Dogman, and all other forms of cryptids and things that go bump in the night. The entire search and rescue don't tell the public really much of anything, and after some things, I was told I can understand why. The general public would be terrified to camp, hike, or really much of anything, and they would lose out on so much money. He's told me about finding bodies that aren't surprising if you've listened to any other park ranger tales. It's the conditions these bodies are found that are disturbing. Luckily, he hasn't run across any children, but found a few adults torn apart with great force, and looked to be eaten by a large canine. The only things at the scene were blood, some hair with DNA on it that I guess pointed to an unknown canine. There have been searches he's been on where he felt like he was being stalked down by a large predator, but never saw a thing. He's had multiple personal encounters with Bigfoot, in a variety of situations, but told me any encounter he's ever had with them was never aggressive. He believes them to be very curious and reserved beings that like to be hidden. The encounters he has had with Bigfoot would appear in the same area these bodies were in, but long after these Bigfoot were no longer frequenting the area, suggesting that some other animal drove the Bigfoots out of the area, which is when they found the bodies with the canine DNA on them. It's unclear whether these other animals are responsible for the death of several hikers and hunters in the area. He hasn't seen these things per se. His other friends who have seen these animals call them direwolves, just by the sheer size alone. I'm not going to make this a long email, but I thought it's good to open lines of communication and give you bits of information here and there. I'll probably see if I can talk to him a little more and dig out some really juicy information for you. Until next time. I'm not a country person by any means, but I've been wanting to own some land for a while now, so I can have my own chickens and goats. I've lived in town for years and years, and finally saved up enough to move out quite a ways out of town. Yeah, my commute is longer, and that really sucks, but I'll tell you what, nothing beats standing out on your own front porch in the morning, greeted by silence. I love to just stand outside in the morning and take a piss off my front porch with my schlong out, exposed to the cool morning air and no one around to shield it from. It doesn't get much better than that. I got a chicken coop built and got a few chickens at the time, and things were great for a while. Until I learned there was a giant upright wolf coming in the evenings and taking and killing my chickens. I now no longer have chickens or a chicken coop. I only have a small pistol that I keep around my house, so it's all I have. I'm not a guns expert by any means, so I don't own a lot of firearms, really just my pistol. I took a step outside on the evening in question for a smoke, and I heard a bunch of commotion going on over by my chicken coop. This bastard raises its head with 3 chickens in one hand, dead, and him and I lock eyes at each other. At least I was assuming it was a him. I was scared. I froze in the moment. I had my pistol on me in that second, but I was so in the moment that I didn't even think to shoot at it. It was almost trance-like if I had to explain it to somebody. It turned around and started walking off when I realized it had just killed and took some of my chickens. I'm screaming at it, still not pulling out my gun. What in God's creation was I even looking at? When I say it walked off, I literally mean this thing stood up on 2 legs and walked off. It was massive, tall, and looked to be around 400 pounds plus if I had to guess. It was brown and gray colored. The next evening, it came around again, and as soon as I saw it, I started shooting at it. It immediately raised its right arm up over its face, like it was shielding itself from the light. I want to say that I emptied a clip into it, but it felt like the bullets didn't even faze this thing. It was like shooting a military-grade vehicle with a BB gun. Ting, ting, ting. Not even a dent. Do you know what I'm saying? The bastard took more of my chickens. Actually, it took all of my chickens. Once all my chickens were gone, it stopped coming around, and I clearly was powerless to stop it. I haven't gotten any goats yet, and with this, I decided against it. My neighbor, who is a very sweet old man, heard the commotion and showed up at my property a little bit later, asking if everything was okay and if I needed anything. Told him what had happened and explained he's had the same issues. He said he's lined his farm with a fine layer of salt, believing it was something demonic and not of this world. He tells me it hasn't come back since, so he thinks it works. Offered to allow me to keep a coop on his property if I wanted, but I declined, not wanting to deal with it. I'm newer to the ways of country living, so it is probably a good idea for me to invest in heavy, hardier guns.